And now we got to talk about more LGBT drama because JK Rowling just set off a new firestorm in the debate over trans rights. The Harry Potter author, who's become a very outspoken critic of the transgender movement and modern transgender activism, often from what she sees as a feminist perspective, has really ruffled some feathers lately because she put out a provocative tweet about the idea of transgender kids. I'll read you what she said, and then we'll talk about the reaction to it, and finally, I'll give you my take. JK Rowling tweeted, "There are no trans kids. No child is, quote, born in the wrong body. There are only adults like you," because this is in response to a comment she got, "prepared to sacrifice the health of minors to bolster your belief in an ideology that will end up wreaking more harm than lobotomies and false memory syndrome combined." JK clarified her beliefs a little bit when somebody replied to her, and she replied to them, further explaining what she was saying and what she wasn't saying. Somebody wrote, "I will be blocked and condemned for saying this, but kids are not born in the wrong body, and the parents are the problem." To which JK replied, "Not always. Kids are watching TikTok videos of surgeons selling the idea that bodies can be modified like Lego. Schools affirm kids' trans identities behind parents' back. A certain kids charity in the UK sent out breast binders to pubescent girls without parental consent. Many parents are struggling to protect kids from a zeitgeist telling them that anxieties about puberty, sexuality, and growing up can be fixed by lifelong reliance on big pharma and by doctors who make Frankenstein look ethical." As you can imagine, the response to JK Rowling's statements has been pretty measured and really just, a stable conversation and critique. Some people disagreeing, some people agreeing, but just people discussing the issues rationally. Just kidding. I decided that I wanted to see what kind of the trans rights crowd were up to and were saying about this, so I headed over to the liberal website, Twitter alternative Blue Sky, and found some interesting takes about Rowling's statements there. Actor George Takei wrote of Rowling's post, "JK reveals herself here. Deplorable." A left-wing activist who calls himself The Serfs tweeted, "They used to say there was no such thing as gay kids, that it was a choice that could be beaten or tortured out of them through conversion therapy," in response to JK's post. And guys, I'll get into my full views on what JK said, and I don't actually agree with her, but let me just talk about this dumb comparison for a minute. Gay and trans are fundamentally different. They're not the same thing. Many kids or teenagers who experience gender dysphoria or gender confusion go through puberty and then stop experiencing that. Almost no one ever feels sexually attracted to the same sex and then that goes away. That's not really a thing, whereas that's a widely documented phenomenon that does and can happen with people who experience gender confusion or gender dysphoria as they go through puberty. So it's just a ridiculous comparison. And JK is not advocating for conversion therapy. She's advocating for letting minors go through puberty. Those aren't the same thing, dude. Another person wrote on Blue Sky, "If you put JK Rowling in a meat grinder and the only thing left of her was her eyeball, maybe then she could see that trans kids are real." You seem stable and well-adjusted. Another person reacted to this news and wrote, "JK Rowling now claims that trans kids don't even exist. She's losing her effing mind, all due to her obsession and hatred with transgender people." The LGBT media also attacked JK Rowling for these tweets. For example, The Advocate published a piece headlined, "JK Rowling falsely claims there are no trans kids." They debunked JK's statement by pointing out surveys where youth say they identify as transgender. They really don't get her point. Pink News wrote a similar piece on JK's statement, also citing a survey saying that trans kids, or a certain number of kids or youth, say they identify as trans. Guys, I don't even fully agree with what JK said, and I'll explain why, but I can at least comprehend it, where these LGBT activists don't even understand what she's saying. She is not saying that there are no kids who call themselves trans or who think they are trans. She's saying that she doesn't think kids can actually legitimately be transgender and that they are simply confused. Now, you might disagree with that, but she's not saying they don't exist. She's saying the concept isn't legitimate. Like, it's not that hard to parse the distinction here if you actually want to approach this conversation or this debate in good faith. But I actually thought that what JK said here is not something I fully agree with, and not something I actually think is productive, because it is true, for sure, that there are tons of teenagers suddenly discovering that they're trans, and there are non-binary as a fad and all sorts of other things. But I think it's wrong to suggest that there are no and have never been any kids who are actually transgender. Although I do think that kind of rests on, well, what do you mean by transgender? Obviously, if you mean people that were born one sex and became the other, well, that doesn't exist at all. That's not possible. But if what you mean by transgender is simply somebody who experiences intense gender dysphoria, a diagnosed medical condition where your internal sense of self is not the same as your biological sex, and you experience extreme mental discomfort with your biological sex, well, that is something that exists and has long existed. And yes, some minors have been diagnosed with that condition and have experienced it for a very long time. Now, I think JK has a point that the huge uptick in this identification is in part due to social pressure and cultural contagion and things like TikTok and these crazy propaganda videos, but there always have been a small number of minors who did experience this from a very young age. I've talked to friends who are transgender who can remember at 5 feeling trapped in the wrong body. This is a condition that does exist, and I'm not sure it's helpful to say blanket trans kids don't exist. I think the better argument is that there is a small slice of society that experiences this medical condition legitimately, but that we don't know who's truly experiencing that versus who's caught up in this trend and this cultural moment, and that they actually need to go through their birth, sex, puberty to figure it out, because that's the process by which many of these gender confused young people in the past grew out of their gender dysphoria and discomfort, or realized that they're actually just gay or lesbian and they aren't actually the other sex, they're not actually gender dysphoric. So we need to allow them to go through that and not put them through these irreversible medical transitions that can leave them sterilized and sexually unable to function for life. That's a much stronger argument, I think, than blanket declarations that trans kids don't exist, which I think do fuel the flames, do miss the nuance and context of the situation. So I don't agree with JK Rowling on this one. But I also think that people need to stop giving one person's words so much power and reacting in such an unhinged and hysterical manner anytime she says something about trans issues or trans people. Because I actually think that when you go back a few years, JK had a much more moderate position on the trans questions that I actually agree with more than the things she says now, but she has become pretty much just totally against rejecting basically all of it at this point. And I think that's in part because of the unhinged backlash and response she's constantly been getting from extreme activists, from haters, from antagonists and trolls. And that has the natural effect when it's so intense and so extreme, the backlash of pushing you further into your own camp, of making you defensive and making you double down in many cases, which is what I think we've seen with JK Rowling as she's become slightly more extreme on some of these questions and less moderate and less nuanced, in part, I think, because when she tried to be moderate, they attacked her viciously as a bigot anyway. So she at some point decided to keep speaking to the people who did appreciate the conversation with her, even if they were more extreme than she was, and she gravitated towards them over time. And I don't fully agree with her, but I can certainly understand that process and that kind of emotional and mental calculation. But what do you guys think? Do you agree more with me or with JK Rowling? I won't bite your head off if you have a different opinion, unlike the folks over on Blue Sky.